All right, so Tanse, Ani, Bojo, Gabi Nitsagason, Pukchahanse Utsenia. Hi everyone, my name is Gabrielle Fayant. I'm originally from Alberta. My family comes from Fishing Lake Metis Settlement, and I'm a guest here on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. And what I've been told by Algonquin folks is that that's just a really nice way to say that Ottawa is located on occupied territory. And so a lot of this conversation will be elaborating more on that and how folks that occupy Algonquin territory can be better allies and supporters to Algonquin folks. And just listening to existing movements and work that Algonquin folks and Indigenous folks in and around Ottawa on Algonquin territory have been doing. And so before we get into all of that, I'm gonna pass it over to Sana, who's here with Ecology Ottawa. And this is part of a project that we've been working on with several other community groups and social justice groups and climate action groups. And so it's gonna take us a while, I think, to get to where we want to be, but I think this is a good start. And so I'll pass it over to you, Sana, to talk about the project a little bit more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, and thank you everyone for being here today. So in Canada, we've grown accustomed to the practice of acknowledging the traditional lands of the Indigenous people upon which we are gathered. Here in Ottawa, that's traditional unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory. I do believe for the most part in the sincerity and the good intentions of these land acknowledgements, but I don't think that we, myself included, really understand what it means to live, work, and play on these lands and the relationship between sovereignty, self-determination, and environmental protection. Today's webinar, as Gabby was indicating, is part of a larger project that's called the Ottawa Climate Equity Initiative, where Ecology Ottawa, as well as the Ottawa Climate Action Fund, have been working to bring together leaders in the climate change, who work in climate change and social inclusion to create more inclusive and effective climate action in the Ottawa area, with a strong focus on partnerships. Throughout many of the conversations we've had with the Assembly of Seven Generations, largely Gabby and Harmony, it's clear that there's a crucial element of this conversation that we've been missing, which is that we can't forget that colonialism, not just here, but all over the world, has always been about the pillage of and the rape of a land and the extraction of its resources to serve the needs of a few. And we can't protect the lands around us until we understand the experiences and the perspectives of the protectors of the land, nor can we assume that partnerships can be so easily established between those who subscribe to the current system and those who are actively oppressed by it and seeking sovereignty and self-determination. So putting that into simple words, it's that there's many conversations that still need to be had. And as a person who does subscribe to the current system, I don't think I'll be able to truly understand, but I can do my best to try. And I hope that today's conversation and going beyond land acknowledgements will be a direction in the right step. So, I mean, a step in the right direction. So thank you for giving me the time, and really looking forward to hearing from all of you.
Thanks, Anna. That was really great to hear from you and to have that context for today's conversation. So I'm just gonna jump right into it because that's how I do things. So at first I'm gonna do like a little introduction, like how I know you guys, just because I think that talking about like relationships is really, really important. It's not like we're just like random people that like we seen each other on social media, but we actually have real connections to one another. So with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Amber. Amber is a really awesome Algonquin Anishinaabe Kwe. And so Amber helps us out so much with A7G and working on moose hides and getting out on the land. And we're actually gonna be going to Pikwakanagan tomorrow to learn how to do some net fishing under the ice. And so having that connection to Algonquin land is so, so important to us. So anyways, I just wanted to say that little part about Amber. But Amber, feel free to introduce yourself more and anything else you'd like viewers to know.
Miigwech Gabby. So, Kwe Bojo, Amber Ndo Jaganashi Nozawin, Minwa Mashe, Nungun Kwe Ndo Anishinaabe Nozawin, Algonquin Anishinaabe Ndao Pikwakanagan Ndonjaba. So I introduced myself in the Anishinaabe language. And what I said was, hello and welcome. My name is Amber. My given name is Amber. My spirit name is Traveling Star Woman. I'm an Algonquin Anishinaabe person, and my family comes from Pikwakanagan. So miigwech. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation tonight.
Thanks, Amber. So I'll go over to Rae. Rae-Anna Whiteduck is from Kitigan Zibi, and I've known Rae for so long, like probably like 11 years. We've worked at like the NAFC together, different marches and actions and movements, and Rae was just like being a real deadly auntie during the moose moratorium. And yeah, it was like awesome to see Rae when we went out there to support Algonquin folks that were defending the rights of the moose and their livelihood. And Rae was just like, you know, directing everyone where to go and taking the lead. And you know, that's rightfully where Indigenous women should be. And so it's really awesome to see you there. So Rae, I'll pass it to you, and just, you know, whatever you want folks to know about you, feel free to introduce yourself.
So before I introduce myself, I just want to acknowledge the territory, the Algonquin territory, Anishinaabe territory, that stretches all the way from where I am now, which is Kitigan Zibi, to where Amber is, to Ottawa, to the further north, to acknowledge the ancestors and everybody who are present and taking part in this moment. This isn't just about a conversation about just me or just Amber or just about certain individuals. It's a discussion, something that holds very dear to me. But before we get into all these questions and I give away some of my talking points, I'm just going to take a moment and introduce myself. So, Kweshaba, Sigwan Wabugan Adishnakas, Kitigan Zibi Neashing Ming Donjba, Megeze Dodem, and Shnambeaki. So, as mentioned, I am from Kitigan Zibi. That's my father's reserve, but I also have very strong ties to my mother's community, who's Ojibwe from Neashing. I've spent time in both of my communities. I've been very fortunate to but to connect and to find my identity in both communities. And it's been a journey, as Gabby has mentioned. I've known Gabby for many years. I've had many journeys since we first met at NAFC, and I am just like super excited, super humbled and honored to be here to partake in this panel and to maybe address some of the questions that people may have. So chimiwech.
Cool. Thanks, Rae. So last but not least, I'm gonna introduce Harmony. So Harmony, are you able to? I'm gonna do it. Okay, there we go. So I'm gonna introduce Harmony. Harmony is like a super helper at A7G. That's like how A7G, like how we do anything. It's not because like we have a bunch of money and a bunch of paid salaries. It's literally just young people wanting to be a part of something, be a part of a community. Yeah, and Harmony's been with us since the beginning, back in 2005. And Harmony does all kinds of awesome work, speaking about the water, the rights of the water, why the water is so important, as well as doing like community cleanups and like literally picking up trash. Like that's how dedicated Harmony is to, making sure this land stays healthy for the next generations. So I'll pass it over to you, Harmony.
Yeah, miigwech. I'm just going to introduce myself in my language. So, Ani Bojo, Harmony Eshkawkogan Dishnakaz, Wikwemikoong Donjaba, Ottawa Nindonji, Ginoje Dodam, Nishra Aji, Nishwaswa, Nadissa Bonagas. So, hello, I just said my name's Harmony Eshkawkogan. I'm originally from Wikwemikoong, which is an unceded reserve. I am a guest here on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory. My clan is Pike, and I'm 27 winters old. I'm so happy to be here and also to learn from the other two guests here.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Harmony. So we have some questions prepared, and I think like the biggest question I thought would help us start off this conversation was just by allowing you all to talk about land defense, water protection, any kind of like those movements that you're a part of. I think would like get us into this whole conversation in a really good way. So I'll pass it over to you, Rae. What's some land protection, land restoration movements and initiatives that you're currently working on or that you're working on with your community?
Oh man, how much time do we have? I'll talk about a little bit. So as I mentioned previously before, I was raised in the city and I had worked with Gabby in the city, but to further all of that, I was born and raised in Ottawa, on Algonquin territory. And so I spent this lifelong journey of trying to figure out what it meant to be Anishinaabe. So with that being said, as Gabby mentioned, her and I have been doing different marches and rallies and walks in the city. I've been partaking in them since I was a small girl. My family is also heavily involved with different rallies and initiatives, but I'll speak to more of my own. The more recent ones that I want to acknowledge was the Moose Moratorium, as also mentioned. I was fortunate enough to participate and to kind of live throughout the whole Moose Moratorium, in the sense that it was a completely enthralling experience that you'll learn as the question goes on, completely changed my life. Ever since then, the way I see and the way I think and the way I do things is completely different. And through that, the Moose Moratorium, it actually brought me home. So after the Moose Moratorium, I actually relocated back to my community, Kitigan Zibi. And since then, I've been involved in various different activities and initiatives in the community. Shortly after the Moose Moratorium, I did run for our Grand Council, which only 7 of our Algonquin communities participate in, but I did run for the women's rep. I did lose, but that was okay because there were other people there to pick up and to carry on. I definitely think maybe I needed a little bit more experience, and that's okay. So I, after that, didn't let that discourage me from wanting to participate and to get involved and to do what I can to help not only the betterment of the people, of the land, of the water, of the animals, but it came at a really crazy time, I think, for Indigenous people, when all these, I don't want to say movements, but these different issues were really finally first coming to light. And so with that being said, myself and a collective of people from the community, Sean Kabonish and Cheyenne Rat, helped me. Well, together we created what we call the Anishinaabe grassroots. Now, the idea of the Anishinaabe grassroots was a way to bring the people back to the land. It was an initiative that there were all these different issues coming to light, and we all felt that we had to do something for the people, for the animals, for the land, for the missing and murdered Indigenous women, for Every Child Matters. And with that being said, we took part in and led several different initiatives over the year. We did the highway shutdown to bring awareness on the moose moratorium. There's, of course, the infamous rally, Cancel Canada Day for the Every Child Matters, that was hosted by Anishinaabe Grassroots and as well as A7G. That was a huge monumental moment, I think, for Anishinaabe people, period. It was an event like no other. I personally, that event changed also my life, in the sense I really felt like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was finally on that path where I was supposed to be. So with that, we also held different rallies within the communities when the first news came of the first schools and the first several thousand children were found. We hosted a rally and laid shoes on the church here within the community. We participated and held different events within the community. We did a softball tournament. As I mentioned, we did the We Are Still Here March on Canada Day. Most recently, we did a mental health fishing tournament to acknowledge, due to COVID and all the different constraints and everything going on, the separation, that mental health was a serious issue going on within our communities because we're so far removed and separated from each other. And so we thought that that was an opportunity to try to bring the people within the community, also respecting COVID rules. So that was one of our more recent. One of my bigger focus coming forward over the next year, I believe, is going to be the focus on our forestry on our territory. So that's something that's just going to be, we're in the beginning stages of seeing where that's going to go and what's required there. But honestly, my focus is constantly switching day to day because there are so many issues that need to be addressed, not only on Algonquin territory, but on Turtle Island as a whole. So like I mentioned, my pull and my attention is constantly being swayed and pulled into different attentions into what needs to be addressed right away. So those are just some of the few things that I've done in the last couple of years. Miigwech.
Thanks, Rae. Yeah, 100%. Like I personally just feel like anytime, like an Indigenous person is like being active and, remembering the ways of their ancestors and revitalizing culture, it's a whole movement. It's land restoration, it's land revitalization. So it just like taking a step and waking up this morning. But thank you so much for all of that. And so I'll pass it over to Amber, and the same question. What land protection, land restoration movements and initiatives are you currently working on?
Okay, so when I think about, the work that I'm doing around land protection or land restoration, I really think about this on like a personal or a spiritual level. And the work really involves creating my own connection to Ake, or the land, as an Anishinaabe person. So I've been doing this work for about the last 3 to 4 years, intentionally doing the work for the last 3 to 4 years, mainly through cultural practices like moose hide tanning, but also through things like, food sovereignty and just spending time outside on the land, really practicing gratitude in my everyday doings, and then also like sharing what I've learned with my relatives. So a little bit about myself. In 2019, I kind of began my journey to self-determination as an Algonquin Anishinaabe person, and my story is, I didn't grow up on the First Nation, but I grew up in a town like 15K from the res. So on my mom's side, I'm from Pikwakanagan. Both of her parents and grandparents are from Pikwakanagan. On my dad's side, my family, they're settlers here to this land. They came here from Germany. And they were actually given a 300-acre farm. It was like, my grandpa told me the story. It was like in the newspaper, you come here and come, have a farm here. So that's what my dad's family did, and that's where I grew up. So I always knew who I was and like where I was from, but I just didn't spend a lot of time with, my family in Pikwakanagan. So I didn't really have that connection to community or to my identity as an Algonquin person. So when I kind of began my reclamation journey, it started with powwow dancing. I danced in the powwows like maybe until I was 10, 12 years old. And then, I kind of just felt like it's really, I have a hard time saying it now, but really I felt at that time like ashamed. So I stopped dancing. And from that time until about 2019, I was like super lost and super disconnected from my identity. So when I made that decision in 2019 to dance again, that was really good for my spirit. And since that decision to dance, like everything has just been on a roll. So in the fall of 2019, I harvested my first moose. I went hunting in the park with my grandparents, my brother, and I've always had a connection to land. Like I said, I grew up on, I had the privilege to grow up on a 150-acre farm, and my dad's family, they're big hunters. So from a young age, I was exposed to that. And so, just being on the land, it's always been something that I really enjoyed or really felt connected to. So when I decided to learn the traditional practice of hide tanning, it really cultivated my like spiritual connection to the land. So it's a lot of work. If anyone has ever had the opportunity to do the work or see the work, it's a lot. So as I was doing all this work, it really made me feel like super grateful and like really appreciative for the harvest. And, that gratefulness continued as the moose like fed my family, for that whole year. And then hide tanning, like it also really was my first introduction to really feeling to be a part of a community. So in short, by doing this work, by, creating that connection, really meaningful connection to land, I am able to just understand a tiny bit about how our ancestors lived before us, like really fostering that reciprocal connection to land. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Amber. Thanks for sharing. sharing that story. Yeah, it's really important that people understand that for Indigenous folks, like our connection to the land isn't just like a transaction or something that can be cut off so easily, but it's in our DNA, it's in our spirit. You know, it's so important, and so sharing that personal story is really important to this conversation too. So I'll pass it over to Harmony, and the same question for you. What land protection, land restoration movements, and initiatives are you currently working on?
Yeah, I sort of feel like Rae-Anna. It's like, how much time do you have? But yeah, I could definitely speak about some of the work that I do in the community. Seeing as that it's World Water Day, the theme is groundwater, by the way, which is like really important. That's where a lot of our drinking water does come from. And a lot of the work that I have been volunteering with, especially during the pandemic, was with this program called Youth Water Leaders that is a part of Ottawa Riverkeeper. So I started volunteering with them like in January 2020. And you're basically supposed to like dedicate like 120 hours to learning about the water. And you're kind of encouraged to use some of those hours towards a service project. And you're supposed to do a service project to kind of educate the community about the local watershed, which is Kitigan, which means Grand River in Algonquin. And so my first service project, I did painting pails because I really wanted to learn more about like how to plan a water walk. And I was trying to plan one for World Water Day, but in 2020, that's when the whole pandemic started to happen. So that's how I started getting reconnected again with A7G. And I asked them if they could help me out in planning a webinar about water walkers for anyone that wasn't able to attend my in-person painting pail workshop. And yeah, it went really good. And then I started to learn more about like, and talking to more water walkers and water protectors. And I was just like really drawn to it. And for the following year, I had to do another service project. And because it was the pandemic, I decided to do kind of partner up with some other youth that were Francophone. And we wanted to do a zine, which is like a self-published magazine. And so I basically applied for a grant, and then we had like a social media page called @YouthWaterLeadersZine, just on Instagram. And yeah, we were just sharing like a bunch of cool water opportunities. And we got other youth to like send in their artwork that was like related to the water. And we had like past youth water leaders send in their art, and even new members send in their art. And yeah, we did it all ourselves. It was all youth. The youth did the translations in the French, and I was able to get some language keepers from my reserve to do some translations in Anishinaabe. And yeah, it was really cool. I think the end of the year, I did like way over 120 hours. I think I ended up doing like at least 500. So I completed the program, and I'm still like really involved just because I'm like so passionate about the water. I'm now considered an alumni, like someone that graduated, but still wants to be a part of the program. And so I was kind of like really more of like a support person this year, which was good because I was definitely dealing with like my mental health after the 2115 residential school children were found. But yeah, it was really interesting. I think seeing a bunch of other youth that were really like passionate about the water definitely helped motivated me. And I was starting to help out this other youth that was doing a mural about like the endangered water species that live in Kitigan. And she really wanted to incorporate like the Indigenous language. And I really had to explain it like, well, I can get you translations from my reserve, Wikwemikoong, but the dialect's very different from the community, the Algonquin community here. So as a youth, I really had to like use all my resources to try and find like translations for these like animals that were like endangered. And I was able to translate like the basic ones. and like get like an elder to just make sure that I did it right. And there's like some translations that I had trouble finding, like for the hickory net. So they were able to help me from there. And then I was able to help her get like an actual like land acknowledgement from the Kitigan Zibi. And it was like really interesting because this youth like had this whole little land acknowledgement written, and then the elder that translated like shortened it. And I was kind of like the third party person who I always had to like, okay, but land acknowledgements are really like a recent thing compared to like our language that is like very that was spoken way before we even had to learn and read the colonizers' alphabet. So yeah, I was just like supporting the youth, but also supporting the Kitigan Zibi's Cultural Center and how they wanted the land acknowledgement to be basically written from their point of view. And yeah, it ended up working out. The plaque's gonna be installed, I believe, this spring. So that's really exciting. Her mural is finished at Bates Island. If you're ever there, you can go see it. And yeah, and just because this whole webinar definitely is about going beyond land acknowledgements, I'm still involved with youth water leaders. And there was like another youth that kind of inspired me to do like another service project. We're hoping to give like actual tours like along the Kitchissippi or Ottawa River, probably biking or walking tours, something that's accessible for people, and just sharing like the actual stories and histories of the river, because they really should be shared by the Indigenous youth. And these are the ones that should be leading the conversations, just like the ones they are today. And if you know any youth that want to join Youth Water Leaders, they are accepting applications until April 17th. Thank you.
Yeah, this is not Hot Wings. You don't get to do your panel and then do shoutouts for what's coming up next. I'm just joking. Thanks, Harmony. I appreciate that. You talked about language. I think that that's like another part of like climate justice that isn't even mentioned, is that like the land and the host nations have specific names for like the water, the watersheds, the animals, and it's not just like a coincidence what their names are. Like all the names are so interconnected and tell you their roles and their responsibilities, and having that deeper understanding I think would help so many people understand what's going wrong in this world. But I think on that note, I'll pass it over to you, Amber, and we'll move on to this question about Indigenous sovereignty. So it's a big word, but yeah, I just want to hear like your perspective on why is Indigenous sovereignty so important to seeing climate justice?
For sure, miigwech. So Indigenous sovereignty is important to seeing climate justice because, you know, prior to colonization, you know, our ancestors were they already knew how to live as an equal, or how to live in balance with Mother Earth. Like we were really grateful people, and we can understand, or at least get an understanding of what that means by learning our creation stories. And like how you were saying, Gabby, about the animals, like the roles of the animals in these stories, they were there to help guide us to live in a good way, to learn from them and to learn from the land. We can also understand this through our oral histories, you know, our rich stories, and as Anishinaabe people through the 7 sacred teachings. These teachings taught us how to live in balance with everything around us so that we could live a good life, and so that we could continue to sustain ourselves for the next 7 generations. So if we can really start to work towards shifting, you know, our thinking to understand that our relatives, the trees, the moose, that they're equally important as our human relations, we wouldn't abuse these gifts from Creator, because we would be thinking about what kind of impact our actions would have. And, you know, last week, I was out on the land tapping trees for maple sap with my dad, and he's teaching me some things, and we're going along, and two of the pails were like stuck together. So he's like going back to the shack to get something, and I'm like, oh, just wait, I need help getting these pails apart. And he's like, oh, just hit them on the tree, they'll come apart. And like right away I caught my thinking, and I'm like, I don't want to hit the tree. Like, so even just like that is just that different type of thinking. And I really believe that if we can start to work towards that, that different type of thinking, or that more Indigenous type of thinking, that will guide us to climate justice. You know, at the time of colonization, we were only really seen useful for our lands, but there's so much more that we can learn from Indigenous folks. We just have to work towards inclusion and, you know, safe spaces so that our people can really be given like a fair and equal opportunity to share our teachings, because, you know, we will all benefit from knowing those teachings.
Awesome. Thanks, Amber. Yeah, I just wanted to like further get into that point about colonization. You know, like the intention of colonization was literally to remove Indigenous peoples from their lands to make way for settlers. And so, like, I come from the prairies, and the prairies in the last 150 years have totally changed. They've been, you know, like forests have been chopped down to make way for farms. And people don't realize that the prairies weren't always flat the way they are today. That's like human creations. And so, you know, that's a part of colonization, and settlers all have to acknowledge their role and how they benefit from that. And then on top of that, colonization then violently made Indigenous people forget, or tried to make us forget, who we really were and our responsibility to the lands. And so we know of that through residential schools and different assimilation policies. So I wanted to just like make that really clear for everyone. And I know that Rae would be able to carry the weight of that point. So Rae, I'll pass it over to you, and yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Indigenous sovereignty and, you know, why it's so important to climate justice.
Man. Why is it so important to climate justice? Well, to me, sovereignty is everything. When you talk about sovereignty, you're not just talking about sustainability. Our ancestors lived and sustained on these territories for hundreds of thousands of years, regardless of population. And it wasn't just here on Anishinaabe, it was hundreds of different nations across Turtle Island. We understood what that relationship to not just the land, but to the animals, to the water, and we understood how important that was. You know, I was an ambassador for Indigenous experience for many years, and you know, that was an amazing experience for me to learn, but also like it just reiterates everything and the foundation of sovereignty to me. You know, our people, even though without science, without research or this, that, or whatever, we had different words for that, right? That was knowledge that was shared down from generation to generation, not by a book, but by word and by speaking, by teaching. And we understood how fragile the ecosystems here and how much we needed to flourish, or how much we needed to live, and we never took more, you know. And that's one of the fundamental teachings is you never take more than what you need. And that's a teaching, I think, that's been significantly lost in colonialism, not even in just settlers, but for our own people too. You know what I mean? Like you don't take more than what you need, because the water, the animals, the land needs the opportunity to replenish itself so that we can continue to sustain. We don't just talk about one generation. I'm going to take this entire plot of land, I'm going to farm it, and I'm going to reap the benefits of all these resources. And then when I pass on, hopefully, no, that's not the way we did things. When we planned and when we moved, or when we cultivated land, or when we took an animal's life, there was a whole relationship with that. There was a whole, I'm taking this animal, or I'm cultivating this land to feed my family, but I'm also going to not take more, so that 7 generations from now, should my bloodline or should my future ancestors want to use that land, that's there for them. And that's something that's been broken and completely lost. You know, it's something that we talk about, but it's not being taken, and it's not being put into those fundamental teachings. So but that brings me to my next point, is that I hear a lot about inherent rights. We have the inherent right. I don't see it as a right. I see it as a responsibility. That's my responsibility to care for the land and for the water and for the animals here. It's not a resource to make money or to take or to benefit from. It's a responsibility to sustain these things so that 7 generations from now, our people will still know what it is to fish, to hunt moose, to tan a hide. You know what I mean? So then we start talking about all of the other issues and like we talked about it a little bit before, the moose moratorium, the decline of the moose population. Why is sovereignty so important to climate justice? Well, we're seeing right now firsthand those effects, the decline of the moose population, the decline of the animals. You know, we're talking about in Kitigan Zibi territory now, they're now removing the buffer lines on lakes to do clear cutting. And what is that going to do to the population of the fish? That's going to, in turn, warm up the lakes and then the decline. So why is sovereignty important? It's because we know for hundreds and thousands of years, our people lived here successfully in peace, with harmoniously with the water, the land, and the animals. And we're in a crisis right now, because it's not climate change. We're in a climate crisis. We're seeing the firsthand effects globally on what's going on. So these teachings and these ideologies, however naive or they may sound, they're actually the fundamental importance of things that we need to be learning and to be teaching, not to be taking more, not to be doing more. At this point, you know, this point in my life, I've been fortunate enough to work in many great different organizations. You know, I actually have come from a background in energy. You know, my mom's community has the world's largest nuclear power plant that was settled in place there illegally, and how that's fundamentally affecting the fish in the water. You know, so there's all these different conversations, but we need to come back. Enough is enough. Stop taking more. This is what Indigenous sovereignty is: our own autonomy, our own right to say no, giving Mother Earth the time to replenish itself, because we've done it successfully for hundreds of thousands of years. Contact has been just over 150 years. And look at the state, the crisis that we're in right now. So if we want to talk about how can we move forward, how can we go beyond land acknowledgements? Well, I think fundamentally we need to look at these teachings and hold them and learn them, not only just teach them to our people, but these are teachings that need to be taught broadly so that we can start to see some sort of revitalization of Mother Earth. Because like I mentioned before, it's not climate change. We are in a severe crisis. So I'm not going to monopolize more time than that, but thank you. That was a really good question.
Yes, thanks, Rae. You guys are Yeah, you guys are blowing my mind. Thanks for all that really good medicine. So I'll pass it over to you, Harmony. What about you? Why do you think Indigenous sovereignty is so important to climate justice?
Yeah, for sure. I really think about like how climate change really affects a lot of marginalized communities. And unfortunately, a lot of those are definitely like Indigenous communities. I think about how climate change really affected those in BC with the fires. Um, there's also so much other like climate change has done. Um, yeah, I just wish like we didn't front line so much, especially the women and Two-Spirited and the youth. I think a lot of us would much rather be restoring the soil, making sure the fish in the river are good, and that we would much rather be doing hide camps with Amber or having like our language camps and language revitalization. But we have to dedicate so much of that time on the front lines just to make sure that the next 7 generations do have some fish to be able to, that they're able to see the fish, that they're able to see the moose, and they're able to learn that how to use every part of the animal. So when I think about why Indigenous sovereignty is so important to climate justice, I kind of think about accountability, which is what A7G has been teaching me a lot about, and just how when I go back home to my reserve and the water lines always farther and farther, and I have to keep walking farther because it's kind of like shrinking, kind of like as if a company called Nestle was stealing water, but also just making sure that like Pipeline 5 or other coastal gas links aren't really going onto our reserves without our permission. And I also think about like a round table, just like how we're all equal, and that you shouldn't just be going to like one Indigenous person and letting them speak on behalf of everyone, because that wasn't our way. We're a community, we're a collective. We work together, we don't do things individually. So, and we like always stand in solidarity with each other. Like if someone from BC, there's a community there, we're standing there with them. It's kind of why I got into like protecting the water. So when I was seeing Indigenous youth here in Ottawa, and they're occupying for a government building for Wet'suwet'en. And that made me just really like, yes, I want to help. I want to do as much as I can, because I want to make sure that the next generations, that they have all these, they don't have that climate anxiety that is so strong. Yeah, miigwech.
That's a really important part of that conversation, Harmony. You're talking about like what's happening in BC affects us over here. And I think that is really, really great to mention, because I think for a lot of folks, they're like, oh, what can I do in the city of Ottawa? But it's like climate and like the land and our connection to the land is much broader than just like what's happening within the municipal borders of Ottawa. And then as you guys were all talking, I was just thinking about like, this like the whole idea of like reuse, reduce, and recycle, and how like Indigenous folks were so far ahead of the time. Like reuse, for example, like natives love shopping at thrift stores. That's like the best example of reuse. Harmony is always telling everybody to bring their tea bundles out and reduce. Your cookums or your aunties are always telling you make sure you eat all your food, and just as Ray mentioned, like stop taking more than you need. Those are values that like are embedded in all of us. And then recycle, like we just weren't even using plastic. So we didn't need to recycle. We were composting things. So like everything we were using could go back to the land in a span of like at least 10 or 20 years. So like birch bark, hides, all of that can go back to the land. It's not gonna just live on for thousands of years and take up space and hurt the environment. So like I just find that we're so underestimated and so undervalued for the knowledge that our ancestors had and that we still carry. So I just wanted to mention those. And I'm going to throw you guys all off now because I'm not going to ask you any more scripted questions. But I'm going to ask you all a really important question that I think everyone really needs to hear. And it's just, how can folks that live in Ottawa that are occupying Algonquin territory, how can they better be in alignment with Algonquin movements, with Algonquin peoples, and take care of the land better? And I'll pass it over to Amber.
Okay. So I think like when people are wondering how they can support or you know what they can do living in Ottawa, I think a lot of it for me is just like uplifting Indigenous voices, Indigenous people who are already doing this work, you know, giving them the space to share, because it is often very you know, difficult to feel safe as an Indigenous person in some of these situations. So really having that space to just let Indigenous people share and not, you know, be like, what about this? What about this? So having that, I think, I guess, support for me would be something that would be nice to see and to have.
Thanks, Amber. I'll pass it over to you, Harmony.
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I think about how I can support the Algonquin peoples here, I definitely always ask my partner that is Algonquin. I think it's just basically echoing what Amber said, just like trying to make that space for them so they feel secure enough in order to like be more involved with their community. Definitely just uplifting those that already did the work. Yeah, there's a lot like people can do, but mostly just like showing up and listening. Definitely listening, I think, is something that a lot of us could really be doing more of. Like money is a good start, but I think just making these spaces so Indigenous youth can be heard more, because that's the only way how we're all gonna grow. And being okay with uncomfortability, like it's okay if you don't know anything. That's how you grow. Yeah, miigwech.
Thanks, Harmony. And I'll pass it over to you, Rae.
Okay, sorry, I'm unmuted. Blink twice if I'm unmuted.
You're good.
Okay, cool. Man, what could people be doing to go and beyond further land acknowledgements? What comes to my mind, unfortunately, is all the stuff that happened with this trucker convoy. Without getting in too far with all of that, that if you care enough about something, then you're going to support it and you're going to get involved. I was floored to see the amount of financial as well as other support that people had. And I understand why. And, you know, people have the right to speak and to stand up for what they believe in, and they should always do that, 110%. There are so many issues that are going on with all of our communities across Turtle Island, across Canada, whether they be the land, the water, the trees, the forest, everything going on. There's always something going on. There's education issues. There's murdered and missing Indigenous women. There's every child matters. There are, the list goes on of different issues going on and happening, and that Indigenous people are always trying to bring light to and start those conversations. So I'm going to echo a little bit about what Amber and Harmony said, is participating in those conversations genuinely. Don't participate in these conversations to respond or to defend or feel attacked. That's not what it is. Come to these spaces with an open heart and an open mind, wanting to learn, wanting to be genuine with that experience. And for me, we need to move forward further to these land acknowledgements, because while it's nice, if prime example, this water bottle, it's plastic, so please forgive me. This water bottle, you know, you take it from me. Okay, so now you say it's yours. And then you go into the front of the class and say, everybody, this is Rae-Anna, or this is Amber's water bottle. I know it's her water bottle. Everyone knows it's her water bottle, but I'm not going to give it back. I'm just going to leave it here and acknowledge the fact that it's yours, that you've cared for it, your family's cared for it for thousands of years, but that's as far as it goes. And so this is what land acknowledgement is, kind of, for me, and this awkward relationship. I believe that in order for us to move forward, all of us collectively, we need to have these hard conversations. People need to genuinely want to know and want to care and make a difference. I will never, ever tell anybody that that's a stupid question, because you know what? It's not a stupid question. These questions need to be asked. We need to have these conversations. Otherwise, how will people know? There needs to be that space for inclusion, but people also, settlers also need to realize that in these spaces, you know, there has to be a mutual respect. You know, don't just have the conversation and leave the conversation. What are things that you could be doing on your day-to-day life with your friends, with your partners, with your families, that you could be doing to help benefit the betterment of the people? Whether it be going at, like Harmony does and like Amber does, going to pick up the trash outside. What are these small little fundamental things that I could be doing on a day-to-day basis to go past land acknowledgement, to do the betterment for climate justice, for, you know, the impacts of what colonialism has had on the land? You know what I mean? There's all these small, simple gestures that you could be doing and following through. There's so many different, like I mentioned, Indigenous issues. Get involved, find out about them, learn about them. You know, I was shocked that some of my friends that I grew up with my entire life had never heard what a residential school was. You know what I mean? So doing these researches about the real history and the relationship between Canada and its Indigenous peoples, you know, start there and be careful, because you know, you can ask these questions to Indigenous people, but you have to realize the years of intergenerational trauma that our people go through. And so a lot of us, and some of us, maybe aren't ready to start having those conversations, and they affect us in a different way. And you need to be compassionate and understanding that, you know, some people are not ready to have those conversations. And so just coming in a good way, participating in local issues. If there's a local issue that you're particularly passionate about, an Indigenous issue, write your local MPs. Find out, go to those communities and have those conversations. Try to build some sort of relationship, you know, understanding what the teachings are, understanding the community or the territory you come from. You know, for myself, I'm going to finish off with a small story. And I know a lot of the friends and people that I talk to share this similar story. And it's when I leave the city and I head home towards Kitigan Zibi, there's like this emotional wave that as soon as I hit the Gatineau Hills and I'm on my way home, it's almost like a comfort that I know I'm on my way home. the thousands of years of my family's bloodline in the ground, my ancestors being there, I feel that connection as I get closer, as I move closer. And so that's why we have such strong ties to the land and to the water and to the animals. And that's something like I thought was like super cheesy before, and I didn't quite really understand, but that's how deep a lot of the connection goes for Indigenous people on their territories. So acknowledge us, lift us up, participate in those genuine conversations, and do the little parts that you can whenever you can. Chimigwech.
Miigwech, hi. I 100% everything that Harmony, Amber, and Ray just talked about. In particular, I just want to emphasize that anyone that lives in Ottawa is occupying Algonquin territory. You're not an invited guest here. You're imposing yourself on Algonquin territory. And so every day in classes and schools, all the children, they say, like, I want to acknowledge that we're on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. That's what that actually means. And so there's hundreds of thousands of children and families that know this. There's no denying it anymore. That was something that was denied for quite a long time. There's no longer any denying it. And so I want to see all of those people that are saying they're on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. I want to see you out on the front lines. You know, like there's 1 million people that live in Ottawa alone. That's not even the little towns surrounding. And when we went out to the Moose Moratorium, it was Algonquin folks holding it down. Like that, maybe 1,000 folks. Where was all the other people that, you know, said that they're on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory every morning? Like they weren't there. And so, you know, and now Ray's also talking about like the forests and how now the trees, they're gonna need your help. So if you keep acknowledging that you're on occupied territory, you have to do something. Sitting in silence and, you know, being apathetic is not okay anymore. So with that, I think we wanted to, if there's any questions, we could probably do like a few short questions, and then we're also gonna pass it over to Steve to do some reflections on behalf of Ecology Ottawa. But if folks have any questions, you could type them in the chat, and we'll try to get to a few. But maybe all the questions have been answered. So I don't see any movement in the chat, so I'm gonna pass it over to Steve.
Miigwech, Gabby, thanks so much. This has really been powerful. I'm Steve Winkleman, Executive Director of the Ottawa Climate Action Fund, which is part of the Ottawa Community Foundation. I see Sana has a question if she wants to ask it first, and then I can pop back in.
Is that okay?
Please.
Okay, great. All right. So yeah, so my question is, so for example, like Ecology Ottawa, part of the work that we do is really, and this is, we've seen this be a hot topic throughout the work that I've done, is that, you know, the city keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, in the sense that it's just like, you know, the urban boundary, it keeps getting larger and larger and larger, and it does what exactly you were talking about, cutting down trees, forests, etc. There's so many areas of this city that have not existed until very recently, and it was just decided that this was going to become, you know, part of that boundary. So my question is, you know, it's like there's a lot of people that are trying really hard, and a lot of nonprofits that are, you know, working with limited resources to fight these different decisions that are harming the land. And what advice would you give, I guess, in the sense of feeling that sense of powerlessness, or feeling like because, you're talking about decisions are made as a community, but, in Ottawa, it doesn't feel that way sometimes. It feels like there's, like a strong hand, iron fist that makes a decision. And it doesn't matter how much Indigenous people and other organizations locally are fighting and putting their resources together and all their time together, it's still going to have the same result. It's almost like you can't turn it over. And so what is your advice for that? Because that's something that I find I've struggled with a lot.
So I'll unmute myself. I'll jump in, Sana. I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm going to talk a more recent battle going within our own communities right now, and that, like I mentioned, it's the forestry. Consultation, or FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, is this new, well, it was new, it's less new now, but consultation has to happen with the Indigenous communities before anything or decisions are supposed to be made. In the past, that hasn't been followed, and so we're in a situation where we're in a constant battle with government, with different government bodies, where we're asserting ourselves to say no, and they're going ahead and doing it anyway. And it's gotten to a point where it has a lot of our communities run down, beat down, and feeling dismissed, feeling put aside, feeling as if our voices don't matter. That's actually fundamentally what colonialism was designed to do to our people. And so it has, in a lot of ways, successfully done that. And then it goes to a personal choice for myself, and I can only speak to myself, and it goes to a personal choice: is when is enough enough, and where do I draw that line? Where, for me personally, as an Indigenous person, my line was showing up and being at the front line. I'll use an example of the moose moratorium. We told the government of Quebec that that was coming, that was going to be an issue, that the population of the moose was declining, and that something needed to be done. They were forewarned several years in advance before there was an actual closure. And that's kind of the struggle of power there. And so essentially our people just had enough and was like, if you're not going to listen, if you're not going to come to the table and genuinely ask us and include us in this conversation, well, that's a no then. Shut it down. Nobody gets to participate in it. And so I find this to be true a lot about the different things or movements that I get involved in. Everybody has a personal line on where they want to draw it. You know what I mean? But showing up, because individually, there's a teaching, and it's a Haudenosaunee teaching. And this teaching talks about the Tree of Peace and how the nations came together, and how these nations were all divided and were fighting with each other constantly. And there was a seer or a medicine man that received a vision of peace. And so what he did is he traveled to each one of these communities with an arrow. And he would talk to the chief in those communities, and he would say, divided and separated like this one arrow, and he would snap it. And he said, you're easily beatable, you're easily destructed. But then when they put all 5 arrows together and tried to break the arrows, that was the teaching and that was the message. And that's kind of the message I'm going here, is that if we're all separately working on these different initiatives and trying to do different plans to get ahead, we're never going to get anywhere, because it's easier to defeat people when they're in smaller clusters. When we go and move together and work together on things, there's no way that people can stop you or to do what you need to do. And that's kind of also what happened here with the moose moratorium, is that the people had enough, and individually they were getting defeated left, right, and center. And so we came together and said no. And so I guess my advice: get involved, work with your local, you know, give me a call sometime, give Amber a call sometime. Is there a way that, you know, we can all be working on these different problems together to find a solution? Because at the end of the day, that's what it is to be Anishinaabe or to be Indigenous. You know, it's to be inclusive. We were never all a person of just ourselves. You know, our teachings, our original teachings actually talk of the 4 walks of people, but that's for another day and a whole other story.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Gabby, do you want to take more other questions?
Yeah, Amber, Harmony, did you have anything to add to that question? Did you want to add anything?
I'm good. That was very well spoken, Rae Miigwech.
I would just add that don't leave Indigenous engagement or involvement till the end. So that's what happens in Ottawa all the time. You know, everybody organizes something and then they ask Indigenous folks if they want to get in on it at the very end. And it's just like, what? Like, this isn't even about us. So I think silence is also a very strong message. When Indigenous folks don't engage in something, it's also sending a really important message that should be acknowledged. And the other experience I've had in Ottawa specifically around different mobilization is that it's often a lot of non-Indigenous groups organizing. And then they kind of bring Indigenous voices in, but we're treated like we're either tokens, or we're also treated like we don't really know what we're talking about. And so again, as a token, like we're just there to be like a prize or something. And so that's not going to work either. And that involves a lot of deep reflection and breaking down a lot of stigmas and biases that people have that they might not even realize they have towards Indigenous people. So anyways, I just wanted to add those parts. So it looks like I got some questions. Some of them are pretty long. And we're running a little short on time. Okay. I'm just reading. Okay, that's pretty long. Oh, that's a good question. There's a question from Eric, and he was asking, are there any successful models where local settler governments have a process to work together with all the communities in the area? So I don't know if any of you know the answer to that, but I'll pose it. Or if you've heard of any best practices in any other cities.
It's a hard question. It's a very hard question because that could vary on personal opinion. You know, reality is a matter of perception, and everybody's perception of everything is always different. And so that can kind of be taken in any way. Whereas one person may think that this is a good framework for consultation, others may not share that same view. I think the fact that it's now only being talked about, you know, it kind of goes to show you the relationship that FPIC or consultation already, or stigma, you should say, it already has. I know that it's now being held up in courts more than it has been in, say, the last 10 years. And it's something that is being taken a lot. Well, I won't say a lot, but it's being taken more seriously now. So it's a really good question, but I'm going to say that it's situational, and where it may seem like a win for one, it may not be for others. So it is a really good question.
Yeah, thanks for that. I honestly don't know any best practices either, which is really sad, I think. So maybe Ottawa could be the first. The pressure's on. This is a really good question too. So how do we deal with it when the city of Ottawa says that they have consulted with Indigenous people, but it's a sham? Like, yeah. So if you guys want to get into it, I can drop some names of unethical organizations claiming to be Algonquin, but we don't have to name names if we don't want. But yeah, what do you guys think would be some good ways to deal with that?
I can take a stab at it. So when I think about, consultation with Indigenous people, and there is a lot of pretendians, we'll say, taking the place of legitimate Indigenous people. I guess for me, something that people could do is maybe actually go to host nations and inquire there, because it is hard to know when you're dealing with people who present to be Indigenous and they're not. But I think if you maybe came back to, okay, in this area, there's Kitigan Zibi, there's Pikwakanagan, there is a lot of Algonquin people, obviously, on the territory that don't, or maybe aren't in those areas, but that would be a good place to maybe double check on who you're consulting with, because the people in the legitimate Indigenous communities, we are very well aware of, who these sham people are. So we do have a lot of insight on that.
Another point I want to bring up too, and that's great, Amber, checking in with those communities, local communities in and around Pikwakanagan or Kitigan Zibi. But I'm going to talk a little bit about like the culture of what it is to be Indigenous. Whenever I go anywhere in Canada, whether it be from my mom's community to my dad's to Calgary or whatever, when I meet another Indigenous person, they'll often ask, well, who's your parents? What's your last name? What family do you come from? And it's not to accuse or to put you on the spot in that sense. It's essentially trying to find out who claims you. Where are you from? What's your connection to your family? Where are they from? And a lot of the time, in my situation, oh, I know your father, or oh, I know your mother. You know what I mean? And so those of us who do have a connection or true identity or whatnot won't always have a problem with being asked those questions, because it's always been a question asked. And so there's ways to going about reaching out, like Amber said, to those communities to, solidify or to get down to the conclusion on whether or not the person that you're dealing with is a true Anishinaabe. Plus, there's, I'm not going to go further than that because I'll be here all night.
I'll just add on to that. When we think about like consultation doesn't mean consent. And I like to always inform people that. I even had a sign that Christy Belcourt inspired me to do. And I think it just says it all. Consultation is not consent. And you're gonna see that a lot in the news. We have consulted with Indigenous people. But if there's a specific name, we can definitely vet it.
Yeah, 100%. It's like people like coming to this conversation and being like, oh, well, we got the go ahead from Algonquins. Like, no, you literally just had a conversation. Consultation is like also a really scary word for a lot of Indigenous folks, because that's essentially how Canada was formed, through what they call consultations or treaties. And so a lot of times like Indigenous folks won't go to things that are called consultations for like those reasons. And so when people don't show up, it's not because they don't care or because they're not because they're not informed. It's literally a statement. And so when Indigenous folks don't show up to things that you're organizing, it's probably because you got to do something different.
Consultation is a dangerous thing in itself too. We're all just saying, Gabby was just saying, a lot of the history with consultation is we'll show up to a meeting, and what's guised as an information session is actually a consultation session. And so when you don't know whether you're attending an information session or a consultation session, you could leave from these sessions and you know what, this organization will have said, well, I've done my due diligence, I've done my consultation, they were present, they did not oppose. And so that's often why we'll move away from consultation, because it is a very dangerous thing. It's a very important thing also to be doing, but it is something that's kind of, you know, don't be offended if people don't come up to your consultation. Maybe there's work like Gabby was saying that you need to do beforehand. Maybe there's information sessions, or maybe even just conversations that need to be had prior to.
All right. So we got to a few questions. We're pretty short on time. So I'm gonna pass it over to Steve. I think you guys put in a lot of work. I hope you get some good meals afterward and we didn't drain you too much of your energy. But I really appreciate everything that you all shared today. Miigwech, hi. Yeah, and Steve, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Gabby. This is really beautiful and helpful and sobering. And I think, to me, one of the takeaways is just about the intentionality. Just stop and think, who is here, what's going on. And one of the things that I want to invite sort of everyone into discussion that OCAF, the Ottawa Climate Action Fund, is going to be bringing forward, and I think really picking up on Rae-Anna's teaching around the 5 arrows, is around urban development, which is around land use, which is about sort of ultimate colonialization, drawing lines on the map. On the other hand, it's happening real time, and the city keeps sprawling out and destroying trees and destroying wilderness. And as we know, abuse happens when it's silenced or unacknowledged or invisible. And we don't see that the new subdivision and the new suburban mall, the new ex-urban development is knocking down trees and habitat. We may see the new development in town, which may have all sorts of ecological or problems in terms of Indigenous claims. And we know that if we don't intensify, if we don't do more walkable communities, we're going to keep sprawling out. So how do we engage with you to have Indigenous voices well represented in those discussions, to bring that bigger picture, but just to see, so we're not missing those invisible sort of silent trees that are, you know, falling outside the growth boundary and will continue to fall, you know, unless there's change. And I don't know the answers, but grateful to sort of have some of the perspectives and humility of people who've, you know, seen this kind of abuse of people, of the land, continue, and without acknowledging it, I don't see how we contain or minimize it. So thanks for the teachings and the challenges, and to shout out to Sana and Gabby for organizing this, and really look forward to figuring out how to all work together and see these challenges and try to address them.
Thanks so much. I feel like Steve's all depressed now. Sorry. It does sound bleak. Like, I feel like the realities of an Indigenous person is hard. It's really, really hard being an Indigenous person. But, you know, we're still here. We're still laughing. We're still being salty and sassy, and, you know, just like still being truthful and remembering all the things that colonization tried to steal from us. And so I hope no one leaves feeling down. I hope you feel you have more truth and more ammunition to make better decisions moving forward. And this isn't a consultation. This is just, you know, one conversation of many, many more. So Chimigwech, hi. I'll pass it over to you guys if you want to say any last things.
I'll just unmute. Oh,
No, you
I'll just
go.
unmute myself. Okay. Yeah, so like Gabby was saying, just around the bleakness of what it kind of feels like to be, a survivor of the attempted genocide of Native people by so-called Canada. Like I carry that intergenerational trauma, but it's important to know that, we also carry that Indigenous strength. And if you asked me if I'd be sitting here today, like 3 years ago, I would have never even imagined. So, in my work around, reclaiming that traditional practice of hide tanning, I've said it before that, in ways it's really saved my life. And while that statement is really true, as I was listening tonight and thinking in, checking in with myself, I think when I said that in the past, what I really know now is that hide tanning really connected me to the very reciprocal relationship with the earth that our ancestors really had before us. So I think it's really important, and I really want to stress how important it is for our people, Indigenous folks, to reconnect with the land, because we do have a lot to learn from the land. The land has always been our greatest teacher, and in times of despair and in times of the climate crisis, our lands and our culture, they will help us survive. So miigwech, and I'll pass it over to Rae-Anna.
So again, I thank you, Gabby and Amber and Harmony and Steve and Sana for putting this conversation together. I was a little nervous, I'm not gonna lie, but excited. And I'm also really grateful to all the participants who decided to partake or to at least bear witness to this conversation, or even to ask questions, because it's hard. It's hard to ask those questions, and it's hard not to feel a guilt or feel a type of way. And to come here and to ask those questions, or to even be a part of that conversation, is one of those first steps that needs to happen. And so without you guys here, and without your guys' support, our message won't be as loud. And speaking to intergenerational trauma, I'm the first generation of my mom's family not to go to residential school, and so that's something that hits extremely hard at home for me and my family, and on my father's side as well. And so even though it is most days pretty bleak, and even as a land defender, as a water protector, as a moose protector, you are constantly being met with this no, or they're proceeding anyway. You're constantly looking for ways to move ahead and to move forward. And so don't let these small loses stop you from the greater picture, or the journey, or the intent that you have. We all have to take those losses, learn from them, to grow from them, so that we can continue to do the work that it is that we hold dear to ourselves. And so with that, I'm just going to say miigwech, to everybody for coming and for having that. And just, we're all future ancestors. We are all ancestors that one day our relatives will pray to for guidance and support. And so what legacy will you leave for your relatives and for your family? And that's a question I ask myself often. What is the legacy that I want to leave as a future ancestor to the generations 7 ahead of us, behind us, and to consider that always in whatever you're doing.
I just wanted to say miigwech to A7G, Ecology Ottawa, to Amber and Rae-Anna. I'm definitely going to be thinking about this conversation later down the road. I'm going to keep an open mind and keep on learning, and just keep on protecting this land and this water that we all call home. Miigwech.
Thanks so much, Miigwech. Hi. Bamapi, Guapman, Eximaga. See you next time.
Pamapi.